Spiritual intelligence is especially important at a time in our history when people are divided and many alienated, not just from other groups, but they are living in psychological exile from their own past. It is spiritual intelligence that reminds leaders and would-be leaders that they will need to be agents of reconciliation. The South Africans under Nelson Mandela introduced us through three very different forms or dimensions of reconciliation. The first I would describe as individual, a kind of existential rebalancing of the self. Carter Oswald, an architect of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, describes this bringing back into balance as undoing historical illusions, deceptions, and misteachings. To make the point, he likes to quote William Wordsworth, who said, "To be mistaught is worse than to be untaught." Forgiveness research in the field of clinical psychology provides clinical evidence to support the South African emphasis on forgiveness as a necessary part of individual and communal health. Forgiveness reduces the stress that comes from anger, from hostility, from bitterness, hatred, and resentment, all of which we are told lead to high blood pressure and impaired neurological function. And that is why Desmond Tutu likes to say that forgiveness is the most selfish thing that we can do. The second dimension of reconciliation is communal. It is undoing the historical illusions, misconceptions, and misteachings, not just among individuals, but among communities. The South Africans have a special word for this form of community. They call it Ubuntu, an understanding of the human connection that is best expressed by the Xhosa proverb, "People are people through other people." It follows then that to deny the dignity or damage the humanity of another person is to damage or destroy one's own. Now, one of the things I learned years ago about building community, both before 60 and in the few years since 60, is that when neighbors help neighbors, and even when strangers help strangers, both those who help and those who are helped are transformed. When that which was their problem becomes our problem, a new connection is made and new forms of community is possible. In other words, getting people to do something for someone else is one of the most powerful forces I know in building community. When you experience the problems of the poor or troubled, when you help someone to find cultural meaning in a museum or creative expression in a painting, when you help someone by seeking to dispel prejudice or fighting bigotry, you are far more likely to find common ground. And you're likely to find that in serving others, you find the genesis of community. The third and final form of reconciliation I want to talk about is political. Different kinds of conflict require different forms and ways of reconciliation. This is an especially good time as we watch the president-elect reconcile with his former adversaries. This is a good time to remember that political reconciliation is not dependent on the kind of intimacy that other forms of reconciliation may demand. Rather, statecraft and politics require peaceful coexistence. Forgiveness may come later, after the creation of confidence and the building of trust. friend of mine in South Africa likes to tell the story of the Dinka elder who, in reflecting on the Sudanese conflict, said, "Reconciliation begins by agreeing to sit under the same tree with your enemy, to find a way of addressing the conflict. At one level, this may mean simply to stop killing one another. On another level, it involves a willingness to work together with one's enemies or former adversaries in pursuit of a solution that is not yet at hand. Although this sense of reconciliation is incomplete, it does interrupt cycles of conflict and lay the groundwork for something deeper and different." Long before Joseph Nye wrote his first article about the soft power, Nelson Mandela was demonstrating that seduction is more enduring than coercion. That while hard power can be used to inflict or to prevent pain, it is soft power that is likely to create influence that is sustainable over a long period. Finally, Nelson Mandela was not just an agent of reconciliation, he was also a purveyor of hope. We are living through a historical epic that psychologists called a period of free-floating anxiety. The period immediately after 9/11 was such a moment. The period after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Robert Kennedy was such a moment. But the anxiety we feel now is not the result of one event, but a confluence of events. It is anxiety about what the wars are doing to our soul as a people, anxiety about coping with the near collapse of our economy, anxiety about the increasing disparity between work and reward. And for those of us who've been working in Louisiana since Katrina, as I have been, it is anxiety about the frequency of hurricanes, which remind not just us, but the whole world, that disaster is no longer an aberration or an abnormal event. Disaster is, in fact, the new normal. So in the end, the challenge for Civic Ventures is to identify and support leaders who are purveyors of hope, leaders who can look beyond what they see and imagine alternative possibilities. Hope is for leaders in the second half of life not so much an act of memory as it is an act of imagination and courage. It is the realization that what we can imagine, we can probably create. You see, optimism is the ability to look at the evidence and to infer that things are going to get better. Hope, on the other hand, is the ability to look beyond the evidence and to see alternative possibilities. When you find a leader who is a purveyor of hope, you will find someone who, like Nelson Mandela, calls us to a higher purpose and lifts us into our better selves. Someone who understands what Václav Havel had in mind when he said, "I'm not an optimist because I do not believe that everything ends well. I'm not a pessimist because I do not believe that everything ends badly. But I could not accomplish anything if I did not have hope within me, for the gift of hope is as big a gift as the gift of life itself." That's it. That is what leaders in the second half of life bring to the table. We may set out to provide help, but we also learn the importance of hope. For we know that the gift of hope is as big a gift as the gift of life itself. Thank you.